All right, so that is getting set up for us right now. So we are now streaming live. I love this mask. It's very, very comfortable, but my glasses fog up even more than they normally do. So watch me take them off a lot. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on a couple of different things that you need to be aware of as we get closer to going remote. So our last day of class is going to be November 23rd. So 2 weeks from now is going to be our last class. So my Monday people, I get 2 more Mondays with you, and then that's it. If you're Wednesday or Friday, I only get, I get 2, actually I get 3 more for you. I get this one next week and the week after. For those of you on Wednesday or Thursday, I only get 2 more in-person sessions with you. So here's how this is going to work when we come back from Thanksgiving break. And I'll keep reminding you of this every Monday so you're not surprised. So we are not going to be meeting over Zoom synchronously. I know that some of you are going to different time zones. And so because of that, what I am choosing to do is do asynchronous. So I'm going to post lectures to YouTube, and I'm going to give you the whole week's worth of lectures, and you will have the week to complete it at your pace. We're still going to have office hours. We're going to do office hours over Discord. So if you haven't joined the Discord yet, you totally should, because if you ever have any questions, that's going to be, that and email are going to be the best ways to reach me. We're still going to do online quizzes and online tests. So hopefully the transition to going fully online won't be too awkward since you've done the online tests and you've done the online quizzes. So we'll do that. We'll do our 4th exam, and then we will have our optional final, and I will continue to do review sessions for you, and hopefully that will help out. So I also wanted to remind you, we've received an email this morning, and I'd just like to very gently remind you, if you are feeling any potential symptoms of COVID-19, please don't come to class. Go back to your dorm. I know it's not a dorm, but I call it a dorm. Go back to your dorm, make sure that you are checking in with Robin so that you can get tested if you need to, or they can figure out what's wrong. I would rather be safe. I would rather you be safe than sorry. So even if it's a cold, don't come in. We have a lot of students that now that the weather's changing and we have a time change, the weather's getting colder, more people are starting to catch bugs. So that could be COVID, but it could be something else. So they need to figure that out. Better safe than sorry. So I just kind of wanted to keep those in mind. Don't forget that exam 3 is due tonight. I sent you a link last night to our review session. Thank you for those who attended. If you couldn't attend for any reason, it is available for you on YouTube. Let me know if there are any problems with the link. So now, we are going to shift gears. So we're actually, for the most part, when we've been working through the book, we've been going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, now we're going to jump. We're going to jump to chapter 12, and we are going to talk about personality. All right.
Next Monday.
Yes, your infographic is due next Monday. You can, I'd prefer if you printed them out, if you, or you can email them to me, or you can upload them to e-learning. So I'm going to change it to a file upload format. Try not to email me if you can possibly avoid it, because infographics are usually many, many megabytes. It means that my inbox is basically going to get clogged. So if you can, try to do the file upload format. If you do not want me to show these at the academic showcase, so I'm going to be hanging them up for people to look at. If you don't want yours shown, that is okay. Just let me know and I won't hang it up. It will not negatively affect your grade. Okay, so how many of you remember these things that kind of were going around on Facebook for a while? So this is kind of personality. And I know a couple of years ago, well, not a couple of years ago, it was more like 10 years ago. These were very common. So you'd have a picture and then you would tag all of your friends kind of based on a personality characteristic. So one time I got tagged by a friend and I was tagged as the lazy one. And I was like, what? I'm not lazy. She was like, it was a joke. I'm like, eh. But you can kind of see, yeah, I don't know about the fatty. I don't know if I like that one, or the party animal, the smitten one, the loud one. Yeah, I'm probably the loud one. All right, so what is personality? So personality is a characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. And so one of the things that you'll kind of notice is that it's often very, very easy to gauge what somebody's personality is. Oh, Dee asked a question about the infographic. It can be a poster, it can be a pamphlet. I didn't necessarily specify a size. It's up to you. So we kind of have an idea of what somebody's personality is when they're kind of acting out of character. So for example, if I came in one day and I'm just like, hey folks, welcome to class. We're going to talk about personality today. You would kind of get the idea that something was very, very wrong. And that's because, well, let's face it, I tend to have a lot of bounce. I tend to have a lot of energy. And if all of a sudden I came in and I had very low energy, you would probably wonder that something was wrong. Now, on the other hand, some of you are very mellow, very chilled out kind of people. And if you came in with the bounce that I had, you would either have to assume that something really, really good happened, or maybe something is a little bit off there. So one of the ways that we oftentimes, so for example, we have here our 7 dwarfs, and their entire personalities are basically summed up by one characteristic. So bashful is bashful, happy is happy, dopey is the comedy relief, sneezy just sneezes. I don't know that that's a personality trait. Grumpy is grumpy, Doc's the smart leader, and sleepy is sleepy. So let's be really clear. Most of us are not like dwarves. We do not just have one personality characteristic. We are multifaceted individuals with a wide variety of personality traits. So we're actually going to take a couple of different tacks when we talk about personality. We're going to first talk about a theory about how personality develops. And then we're going to talk about how we can nurture. There's another theory that kind of talks about how we can nurture personality and encourage people to grow. And then we're going to talk about theories that describe the different types of traits that we see in people. So we're going to be moving around quite a bit when we talk about personality. But in the email that I sent you, I did mention that I would be ragging on Sigmund Freud, and well, here we are. It's the moment you've been waiting for. Now, I want to be really clear before I start ragging on Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud did a lot for the field. A lot of the ways that we do things like therapy, and a lot of the ways that we kind of understand unconscious processing are definitely due to him. Psychology would probably not be as well known if not for him. Having said that, though, he casts a very, very long shadow. Every time that I tell somebody that I am a psychologist, somebody will usually go, oh, I don't want to talk to you, you're analyzing me. And I'm like, I'm not that kind of a psychologist. I don't even have a really good couch for people to lay down on to talk about their feelings. So he kind of casts a long shadow on the field. And I would also remind you, because I care about science, most of his theories have no scientific basis. They are entirely based on clinical observations. Pandora, I talk about how much I dislike Freud at least twice a week. That was me when I was in college. I kind of got over that a little bit because I'm like, we have to talk about Freud. His ideas are pretty interesting, but I think of them more as philosophical ideas rather than actual scientific ideas. So Freud was a physician, and most of his theories were based on clinical experience. So he is the person that basically brought the psychoanalytic perspective into play. So oftentimes he would have instances where his patients would show up with idiopathic symptoms. And when we talk about the term idiopathic, for those who don't know, idiopathic means that there is no known underlying cause. So these people would come in and their arms would be tingling, or they would temporarily have lost their visual ability. And when Freud examined them, he often ended up finding that there was no known underlying bodily cause to explain the behavior. So Freud believed that what was happening is that we get stressed out by things, especially, according to Freud, our unconscious motivations. And we have a lot of them. There are motivations that we have that are not always very well known to us. We're not always aware of them. So for example, a couple of years ago, some people that I knew ended up getting married. And they didn't really, I didn't really like them very much. They didn't really like me very much, but I was like, I need to do something nice for them because that's what a good person would do. So I got them a gift, and I never got a thank you note at all. And I remember being really torn up and irritated that I didn't get a thank you note. And it became very, very clear that I was not doing this because I necessarily was doing it out of the goodness of my heart. This was not a purely altruistic motive. This was me wanting one last opportunity for their approval. Because sometimes we like to be liked, and some of us have a very hard time when we are not liked. And sometimes some of us want to figure out why. And by us, I mean me. Sometimes that happens. We're all human. So we have these unconscious motivations that drive us, and we're not always aware of it, but they cause us stress. They cause us problems. And because we're not aware of them, these motivations and these drives build up inside of us, like water pressure inside of a pipe. You know what happens to a pipe when there's too much water pressure inside of it? It bursts. And so because of that, much like too much water pressure causes a pipe to burst, if you have too much of this unconscious stress causing you problems, eventually it is going to build up to the point where it manifests itself in your outward behaviors. Additionally, one of Freud's other aspects that he really wanted to look at was childhood sexuality. This is where it gets a little squicky. I'm not going to lie. He basically believed that sexuality in children tends to develop in a series of stages, and it's not 100% fully realized until adolescence. But a lot of the ideas that we have in childhood that Freud believed were related to sexuality are socially inappropriate to express. So, for example, when a little kid about 3 or 4 says that he wants to marry mommy when he grows up, Freud is going to basically say, yeah, that kid really wants to marry mommy. And we will talk about the Oedipus complex, of course. Now, obviously, that kind of idea is really socially inappropriate to express, obviously. And so Freud believed that we tamp that down, and again, it manifests itself into our outward behaviors. So his approach was something called psychoanalysis. So psychoanalysis here has 2 different meanings. So psychoanalysis is an approach to therapy, And Freud believed that psychoanalytic theory is a theory of how personality develops. It's also sometimes called the psychodynamic theory. But the idea behind psychoanalysis is that you can reduce the unconscious tension and stress that you feel and your psychological problems by exposing those unconscious motivations, those unconscious drives. By exposing them, you make the unconscious conscious. By making the unconscious conscious, that provides the patient with a sense of relief, and that can help them with their issues. So the idea behind the psychoanalytic perspective is to basically make the unconscious conscious. There we go. All right, is everybody good here? Cool. So we have to talk about Freud's theory of mind. Now, I want to be really clear. Freud did not come up with the iceberg metaphor. Now, oftentimes we tend to treat the iceberg metaphor as if it's something that Freud came up with, but he didn't. It was other people. And it turns out it's a pretty good way to explain the relationship between our consciousness and our unconscious mind. So the idea here being that the part of you that is conscious, and by the way, cognitive psychologists believe this as well, you can only be conscious and pay attention to so much of your world. So our conscious experience is a snippet of what is out there and what is within us. So you can kind of think of your conscious mind or your conscious experience as being the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And if you know anything about icebergs, generally, anytime that you see an iceberg, they look pretty big from the surface of the water, but it turns out that they're even bigger below the surface of the water. There is more to the iceberg that we do not see. So our conscious mind is basically the tip of the iceberg. Now, this little area that's right just below the surface is what you can refer to as pre-conscious. This is currently outside of our awareness, but we can very easily access it and make it conscious if we need to. So for example, I want you to think about the last time that you were in this class. Now, that wasn't in your conscious awareness. That probably wasn't in your conscious awareness until I prompted it. So this is a case of what we would call pre-consciousness. It's currently not in your awareness, but you could bring it into your awareness pretty easily if you needed to. But then the bulk of what our mind is, according to Freud and other psychoanalysts, is unconscious. It is far below the surface, and it's probably not going to be things that we can access consciously without a lot of work or a lot of effort. While we are waiting, is everybody good? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the psychoanalytic perspective. And one of the big things that kind of comes into play with therapy, and I would say that this is not just true for the psychoanalytic perspective, but I think it's also true for a lot of different forms of therapy, this notion of free association. So the idea here is that nothing that you tell me is accidental. Nothing is coincidental when we talk about the psychoanalytic perspective. So if I ask you how you're doing today, or I ask you what's bothering you, the first thing that you tell me is meaningful. You could have picked anything to tell me about. You could have picked anything, but you chose that. That means that it's probably not an accident, and it's possibly something that is weighing on your mind. So free association is kind of based on that idea. You could have chosen to tell me anything, but you chose to tell me that. So this clearly means that it's important to you, or that it's troubling you in some way. So we need to get to the bottom of that. So you basically say whatever comes into your mind, because Freud believed that nothing was accidental. And so this can include unconscious memories that are being exposed. Additionally, our unconscious memories or our unconscious thoughts can seep out into ordinary behavior. So I've kind of talked about this a little bit. Freud believed that nothing was an accident. That's true in free association, and it's also true when we talk about jokes. So Freud believed that jokes always had an element of truth to them. So for example, if I'm playing a video game with my friend and they basically, like, I don't know what game we're playing. Let's go ahead and say Smash Brothers, because I'm not up on the new games. I mostly just play Animal Crossing on my Switch. And to be fair, it's a Switch Lite. But let's say I play Super Smash Brothers and somebody basically gets me with a really good move. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to come to your house tonight. I'm going to kill you where you sleep. Now, that's a sarcastic joke. But Freud would say, no, on some level, you probably want to murder your friend. So there are no jokes. Sarcasm is a way to basically say what you're thinking and say what you're actually feeling, but basically hide the truth under a veil of sarcasm. So those of you who are a little bit snarky, think about it. The other things that kind of happen, we've talked a little bit about Freudian slips. So a Freudian slip is kind of an example where you use one word instead of another. So those of you that have occasionally called your teacher mom, how many of you have called your teacher mom? Raise your hand. Yeah, I know I have. Now, Freud would say that when you call your teacher mom, you are basically associating aspects of your mother with your teacher, that you basically do think that your teacher is another mother figure. I would say it's probably a little bit less complicated than that. You see your teacher a lot. You see your mother a lot. Odds are pretty good. Your teacher, especially if we're talking like K through 5, your teacher's probably female, and your teacher tells you to do things much like your mother does. So it's not that hard to see some similarities that you might cognitively pick up, but it doesn't mean you think your teacher's actually your mom. We also talked about dreams. Freud believed that dreams were a very important way to learn about the unconscious. So dreams will often have what we call manifest content, the actual content of the dream, and then latent content, which is the underlying symbolism. So I'm going to share something. A couple weeks ago, I dreamed about the end of the world. I dreamed about the apocalypse, and I was outside near an overpass, which here in Nevada makes absolutely no sense. And I'm hiding under an overpass with my dog and my partner. And that was a little bit scary. Now, Freud would say the manifest content is that, but the latent content is probably something not related to the end of the world. Rather, it's probably related to something ending. Yeah, oof. Yeah, I don't like those. To be fair, when you think about it after you have the dream, I'm like, where did all these buildings come from? We don't even have a Quick Trip here. How did a Quick Trip pop up in my dream? That makes no sense. And the more that you think about it, the more you're like, this is probably just your brain firing in random patterns and stuff like that. And of course, because of COVID, you know, we watched movies like The Stand over the summer, so those are pretty fresh in my mind. So that might be why. But the idea being that your unconscious is basically seeping out in different ways, and this can help us retrieve those unconscious motives and desires and thus free ourselves from them. So here is Freud's famous couch. So when you think of free association, you often think about somebody laying on a couch. Yes, I love Quick Trip too. I love Quick Trip coffee. I love Quick Trip coffee. I also like the like all of the like Mexican snack cakes and stuff like that. They're very, very good. But free association is usually done on a couch. You basically say what's ever in your mind, and the idea being that whatever you say is meaningful, otherwise you wouldn't have brought it up. So when we talk about how personality develops, we have to go back to our iceberg metaphor. So Freud believed that your personality develops due to an ongoing psychic conflict between two different aspects of your personality. So folks, this is where we talk about the id, this is where we talk about the ego, and this is where we talk about the superego. So the id, we're going to start with the id because Freud believed that when you were born, you were all id. So think about an id. So the id is basically, it wants exactly what it wants right when it wants it. It is our basic biological drives and all of our unconscious motivations. Kind of think of your id as your own brain's tiny little Veruca Salt going, I want it now. So think about what happens when you're a baby. There are not a lot of things that you want. You want basic biological things. You want to eat. You want to drink. You want to eliminate your bladder and or your bowels. So the id is basically really selfish. It is only concerned with getting what it wants. It's basically our basic biological impulses. Freud would also include sex in that. So the id is also very, very sex driven in addition to basic biological needs. So here's the thing though, when you're a baby, you get all your needs met, right? If you cry, ideally, your parent should or caregiver should help you take care of your needs. They should change you. They should feed you. They should give you water if you need it or milk if you need it. But eventually, you get older. And when kids are little, they can get away with doing a lot of different things, like little kids. Like I remember when my nieces were little, my 2-year-old niece basically came up to me and went, I don't like you. Like generally little kids that are running on pure id, they think of something and they do it. They don't necessarily think about the consequences. They are only thinking about what they want. So if a 2-year-old wants to basically pull off their pants and their pull-ups and basically run around the house with no pants on, they'll do that. That's how an id works. It's like, I want to take my pants off, and the id will let you do that. The id will do that. But when you're older, and especially when you go out into society and you go into public, do most parents let their little kids run around the Walmart without their pants on? No, they do not. So we start to learn that we live, I'm sorry, I'm quoting a meme. We live in a society. So we basically discover that we live in a society that has certain rules for appropriate behavior. And let's be clear, the id doesn't care about appropriate. If it wants to get if a little kid wants to get their hands on poop, and basically smear it everywhere like my little sister did once, they'll do it. But over time, and the older that you get and the more that you are out there in the world and with your parents, the more that you learn that you can't always get what you want exactly when you want it. And sometimes the needs that you want are socially inappropriate to express. Like, we know as adults, it is not a good idea to go up to somebody that we don't like and straight up punch them in the face. That would be really bad. And legally, that is assault. So we know that those are not good things to do. So we have the id that is selfish. It wants instant gratification. It operates on something called the pleasure principle. It wants pleasure and it wants to avoid pain. But then we have the superego. The superego is basically your internalized ideas from society about how you should behave. So I have Jiminy Cricket here from Pinocchio, but let's be really clear. You remember Jiminy Cricket? He's pretty nice. Your superego is not as nice as Jiminy Cricket. So you basically have all of these internalized ideas about how you should behave. And the superego, basically, if you go against the restraints of the superego, it's like Freud kind of likened it to a punishing father. It shames you. Like, it's your own it's your own little shame chorus with the bell going shame, 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 but worse. And shame is generally not something that we want to feel. So you have this conflict between your id, which is very, very selfish. It wants what it wants exactly when it wants it, and it seeks pleasure. And you've got the superego that's basically like, you can't do these things. And that's how the ego develops. The ego is basically the mediator between your id and your superego. Whereas the id operates on the pleasure principle and the superego operates on society's ideals, the ego is basically trying to get the needs of the id met in socially appropriate ways so as to not anger the superego, because nobody likes to feel that wave of shame. Nobody likes shame. So your ego operates on what we call the reality principle. So the id operates on the pleasure principle, the ego operates on the reality principle. Can I get my needs met in socially appropriate ways? So your ego is largely conscious. Your superego can sometimes be conscious, but it can also be unconscious. And your id is almost purely unconscious. And according to Freud, this is how your personality develops.
Would id be like intrusive thoughts and things?
Huh?
Would like intrusive thoughts fall under id?
What thoughts?
Intrusive.
Intrusive thoughts operate under the id? It can. It can. Intrusive thoughts could potentially be that. Now, one of the things that our ego also does to help us cope is by reducing our anxiety by distorting reality in a variety of different ways. And these are what are referred to as defense mechanisms or ego defense mechanisms. So not all of the ones that Freud listed are here, but I'll talk about a few of these, and I'll try to be pretty quick on them. So one of the first big things that Freud thought we did is that we repress. So basically, if we have a memory from our life that is causing us trouble or is threatening our sense of self, we can basically block it from our awareness by burying it deep into our unconscious. So repression is when we take these memories, these thoughts, these feelings that are causing us pain, and we basically bury them into the unconscious. Regression is where we basically go back to a younger age. So how many of you have had this happen? I know this happens when I get home. How many of you feel like when you get home and you visit your family, and you probably won't notice it much now, but you might when you're older, how very easily you slide into those old dynamics that you had when you were younger? You slide back into those old worries and concerns. Anytime that I go home and visit my family, and especially my mother, or if my sister is present too, I start getting dragged back to when I was a teenager and was kind of like, my sister's my mother's favorite, and getting into kind of that mode. So we can regress. How many of you have had instances where you're stressed out and maybe you suck your thumb for comfort, or you start sucking on a hard candy, or you go and grab a blanket and cuddle up? Freud would say that all of those are examples of regression, that you're basically going back to an earlier age to find comfort. Reaction formation. Okay, so how many of you have watched Hey Arnold? Okay, how many of you know Helga? So what is Helga's whole thing? Helga likes Arnold, right? But she doesn't want to tell him because she doesn't feel very good about herself and because she's a bully. So what does she do instead? She bullies Arnold and she yells at Arnold. This is what is called reaction formation. So reaction formation is basically the idea that you are behaving in ways that are the opposite of what you really want to do. So instead of telling Arnold that she likes him, Helga calls him football head and bullies him sometimes. And then there's projection. So projection often tends to happen when we ourselves are doing something that is not right. And to make ourselves feel better about the fact that we are doing something that is not right, we basically assume that other people around us must also be doing that thing. And we basically do that to make us feel okay with it. So does anybody, either on Zoom or here in class, how many of you speed? Okay, how many of you speed more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit? Oh, I'm judging just a little bit, just a little bit. Okay, so how many of you in the chat on the Discord? Okay, so Thalia, I'm going to pick on you. It's okay. I'm not actually judging that hard. I speed too. And sometimes if I'm passing somebody, I do go over 15, but then I'm like, I gotta slow it down. Oh my gosh, this is too fast for one person to be going. So Leah, you speed. You know that's against the law, right?
Yeah.
Why do you do it?
I don't know. It just happens sometimes.
Okay.
How
How many times have you tried to justify it to yourself because everybody speeds?
A lot.
Yes, because you know it's not something you're supposed to do.
Especially when I see like a cop and I slam on my brakes. I'm just like, everybody's doing this. It's okay.
Right. So that's kind of a goofy example. You know, we all do it and we justify it by the fact that, well, everybody speeds. That's not actually true. I drive to El Dorado Springs and there are clearly people in that area and also here in Nevada who do not speed and could probably stand to a little bit, but that's just my type A impatience talking. Let's go with a more, a clearer example, because really, speeding is not necessarily what I would consider, I mean, it's not great. And if you get in a car accident, the fact that you're speeding could make it worse, but it's not immoral the way that, it's not really immoral the way that other kind of things are. It's just illegal, which is not necessarily the same as morality. But how many of you have heard of things like this? I'm not asking you if you've done this, but how many of you have heard of things like this where somebody's cheating? Somebody is cheating and being unfaithful to a partner. And how many times have you heard about these instances where a partner is cheating and they're really suspicious of their partner? So let's say, not that this would ever happen in any universe because he's not a bad guy, but let's say my partner was cheating and he would be worried that I'm cheating too. So he'd check my phone, he'd check my email. He wouldn't want me talking to any other guys or anything like that, but he's the one doing the cheating. So it's projection. This person is doing the cheating. They assume the other person must also be cheating to make themselves feel okay with the fact that they're breaking a commitment. Don't be around those kind of people, y'all. That's gaslighting, and it's not right. Rationalization is basically you trying to explain away why you chose to do what you did. And that's pretty straightforward. Displacement. So again, rationalization, before I move on, rationalization is you basically explaining away why you did what you did. Like, I was speeding because I was in a hurry and all these other cars are just going so slowly. Well, that's great. But you could have just said, I was impatient and I decided to speed. Okay, so displacement. So displacement happens when you want to vent your frustration on somebody that you probably shouldn't. And so what you end up doing instead of venting that frustration out on somebody who could be really scary or somebody who's an authority figure, is you take it out on a safer target. So for example, let's say that you were mad at me for some reason. I hope you're not mad at me, but if you were mad at me, you might be really nervous to come and talk to me and vent your frustration. You also know that yelling at your professors is probably not a very good thing to do. So because of that, you kind of take that anger and that frustration. Displacement would be, you're mad at me, but you don't actually want to talk to me about how you're feeling because it feels inappropriate, and you go and take it out on your sweet mate. You yell at your sweet mate because you're having a bad day. Or the classic example, and you should never ever do this, the boss yells at you at work, you have a really hard day, you can't yell back at the boss, so you go home and kick the cat. Do not kick a cat. Do not. Dr. Gilchrist will have a very, very stern talk with you if you kick a cat. If it's a stranger that kicks a cat, I might be more prone to tackling them. When I was in college once, I saw somebody kick a puppy like many, many yards away, and it took everything within me not to just run after that person and just tackle them like it was in football or something. That was hard to watch. Denial is basically acting like there's no problem at all. So denial is basically, there's not a problem here. Dare I say it, or it's a hoax, if you get my drift. It's a hoax, it's not real. So it's basically denying that there's any sort of problem at all and pretending that there's no problem when it turns out that there is. So I know I spent a lot of time on these, but I think they're fun to talk about. And these are all ways that we warp our sense of reality to basically make ourselves okay and not cause our ego so much stress. The ego is constantly mediating fights between your id and your superego. It's hard enough as it is. So how do we assess the unconscious? Well, we can do free association. So again, the idea being that what the first thing that you tell me in free association must be meaningful. But there are some other things that we can do. We can describe an unclear image or tell a story about an image that we see that is ambiguous. Does anybody have any good examples of what could be potentially used as a projective test? The ink blot test, very good. So here's something kind of interesting while you're writing things down. So the ink blot test used to be very, very licensed and was very, very expensive to basically get a copy of and administer yourself. It is now, I believe, available for anybody. So you can print out pictures of ink blots and put them in your house. Really, they all look like a bunch of orchids or wasps to me. So there you go.
Yeah, I've never really seen like shapes and everything. I'm just like, it really just looks like a block. Like,
yeah.
really anything.
Well, I'll show you one and we'll see if you can see anything. All right. Oh, we got something in the chat. Let's see. Oh, speeding depends on the speed limit. That is also true. If you drive on Kansas highways, their speed limit is 75. I never really go more than 80 because 85 just feels wrong. Like my car can't go that fast, or at least.
It's really bad. I just,
okay,
yeah.
Okay. So if you're going over 100, I'm trying not to judge,
Yes.
but I am judging just a teens. I'm judging just a tiny bit.
There's like, Talia, really? I'm like, listen. Oops. But when I'm going like on roads that I know like people are gonna be on, the fastest I ever went was 13 because I was in a 29-year-old car and it wouldn't go up the road. So I like gassed it, and when I gassed it, I went like really fast, and then the cop pulled me over and he was like, "You heard my sirens and you were stopping, and then you started speeding up. Were you gonna run away?" I was like, "No."
Oh.
I'm on a hill in a trash car. Come on, guys. So there's that one.
Okay, so this is the thematic apperception test, or the TAT. So you have to make up a story about an ambiguous image. So somebody, and I'm gonna strictly limit this to Zoom people. So those of y'all that are zooming in, tell me what you see in this image here. What's going on here? What's going on here? A woman cries because she just found her husband's dead body in bed. How many of you here in class came up with that? Okay. Woman pretends to be sad after her rich husband has an unfortunate accident. Ooh, that is very dark. I mean, really, this is a dark image, though. Maybe it could be, she's crying because she wanted to go on a date with her husband, but he drank too much last night and he needs to spend the time recuperating. But the idea here is that whatever you pick is meaningful. She could be laughing just because she wrote on the other side of his face. Okay, so that's not so dark. So the idea here being that what you pick first and what you see first is meaningful, that you didn't pick it by accident. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. And we will talk about the ink blot test, and we will talk about other theories of personality next time. Have a great day, everybody.